Hey everybody, welcome to Q EDU. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super thrilled to have you here today for LGBTQ immigration activism. I am your host. My name is Frederick. My pronouns are they, them, and I am Out Youth Texas GSA Network Coordinator. And I am going to turn it over to Liam, our moderator for today.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit more about immigration and queer activism, especially at a time like this. Just a quick intro. My name is Liam, pronouns he, him. I am 33, living in Texas as a queer, transgender, DACA recipient man. And it's immigration in general is the topic that is obviously very personal, and activism as well. So, but I'm really excited to talk today with both Sherry and Aram today, who do a lot of work in the industry. So you can do some intros. Aram, do you mind getting us started?
Hi, it's an honor to be here today. My name is Aram Hansi Fuentes, she, her, hers pronoun. I am an artist. Mainly, I use textiles in my work and social practice. So my work is socially engaged and mainly talks about immigration. And I am based in Chicago. I am also a professor of art. I'm an artist in residence at Loyola University, Chicago this year. And yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you all. My name is Sherry Van, or you can call me Shetty. I use they, them pronouns, but any pronouns are great as long as they're with a lot of love and respect. Truly, I wake up almost every day and I'm still trying to figure out that question for myself. I'm still on my own gender journey. I live in Austin, Texas, and I'm the arts and culture change strategist for United We Dream, where we are the largest immigrant, undocumented, youth-led organization in the country.
That's awesome. That's powerful. So, that takes me to one of the first things that I wanted to chat about, which is, immigration in general. What makes it an important issue for each of you personally? I mean, Sheridan, seems like it's a big part of your work. Do you mind telling us about your personal story in immigration? That's for Sherry. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were my bad. Yes, of course. I'd love to. Yeah. So I'm like I mentioned, I'm undocumented. I'm also queer. I immigrated here to the U.S. actually from Mexico when I was a year old back in 1996 with my mom. We immigrated from Mexico. I was born in the state of Guerrero, so in southern Mexico, and traveled all the way across the country and over the river with my mom to get to Fort Worth, Texas, in North Texas. That's where I spent most of my life, grew up as a teenager. It's where I really fell in love with our longhorns and the cow stalks, fell in love with our art museums there. Grew up starting to understand myself in the context of this country as someone who is not only brown and Latinx, but also undocumented and also queer. And I moved to Austin when I was 18 after getting so much support to attend college as an undocumented young person. And it was in Austin where I began to come out once more, both in my undocumented status, but also in my queerness. And it was with all of the love and help of a youth-led organization from United We Dream that was led by undocumented young people. Since that time, that was in 2012, became more adamant in my fight for my community. I am a beneficiary of the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it provides temporary protections from deportation for 2 years and work authorization. So I received that in 2012 as soon as the program was fought and won for by immigrant young people. And it's really what allowed so many people across the country, just like myself, to start to come out at that time. And I knew that I did not want this to be only a protection for myself. I saw in the leaders around me, the immigrant and dream elders, that they were really fighting for protections for everyone, not just young people. And although a lot of elected officials love young people and wanted to act on our behalf, not very many people are willing to stick their neck out for their parents, for queer and trans folks, for folks who were detained, incarcerated, those who had been already separated from their families. And so as I was hearing those stories of those dream elders and immigrant elders, I was really inspired, and I became more committed than ever to say, I want to be able to bring these protections and this feeling that I'm having of joy and thriving to my family. I want them to have these things too. And so since 2012, have been a youth organizer, fighting for our communities. And in 2016, joined the United We Dream team as a staff member. And in this year, moved into a role leading our arts and culture strategy, where every day I have the honor to be able to work with our members and telling their stories in beautiful and creative ways, to build power for our people and centering our joy and our pleasure and our comfort and our rest, because all of those things are so important for us. And I think big lessons that I have learned from also even the queer and trans leaders from the 80s and 90s who have led us to have so many of the freedoms and joys that our people are able to have today.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's definitely, thank you for the work you do. As a fellow DACA recipient, I've got to say, it's a big deal to be able to share that kind of feeling with our family members and with other, immigrants who are unable to also partake in the same rights and privileges that DACA does give us. And Aram, tell me about your story. What makes immigration so personal for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And yeah, Sheridan, that was such a powerful story and so compelling. And yeah, you're doing such powerful work. And I'm like, oh, it's so hard to follow up after I'm going after you. But yeah, so I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and moved here to the Central Valley, to Modesto, California, when I was 5, almost 6 years old. And yeah, and so just coming to a new country, and then my parents didn't know what they would do for work. They were highly educated. Obviously, being able to legally come to this country, we sort of forget the qualifications you need and, how much you have to prove yourself to be able to come here. But then obviously their education didn't transfer over, their work credentials, they didn't speak English very well. So they already knew, but experiencing it is different when you really see what sort of work opportunities that you have. And so my parents quickly found out that it was super limited, and they started to work at a dry cleaning business, because someone in the small Korean community in California sort of, helped them out. Right. And so they started doing that work, and then were able to own their own dry cleaning business or store. Right. And they still do that work today. And so for me, that's where in my art practice, where sewing becomes really powerful and important for me, that it is it's a medium, right? It's a process that ties directly to my identity as an immigrant. And so I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, and I studied Latin American studies with a focus on immigration policy. I actually thought I was probably going to be an immigration lawyer. And then I found art, right? And I think what I found so compelling in art is, I'm still decoding why art is so important to me, but I think, that, so with my projects, I create sort of these socially engaged projects that I wish really existed, right? So I created this project called the Protest Banner Lending Library, where people make protest banners, and that there's actually like a physical lending library of these protest banners, right? And so that becomes, I wish that this was actually like a real library. That's sort of where it comes from. But also, more specifically, how I started that project was because of working with non-citizen immigrants, those who are undocumented, you know, that, and talking about how even the act of protest, right? It's like such this American thing, and people are constantly talking about like, oh, we need to all take to the streets and we need to all fight this thing. But it's really a privileged space, right? Being undocumented, it's sort of, or not having, or being on a visa, there's definitely this fear that immigrants are constantly carrying, right? And so that project, how it became a lending library was, I was making purchase banners with a bunch of non-citizen immigrants, you know, who are my friends and family. And there were protests happening, and sort of this realization of like, oh, we just made all these banners, but we don't feel that comfortable taking them out, you know, and risking that, right? So I was like, well, then why are we making these? Oh, because it's powerful, because we want to put these messages out there in the world. And it was like, well, then if we create sort of a lending library of them, then people who need banners can sort of become these co-conspirators, or like, you know, take these messages and take these words out there into the public space. So that's sort of where that project comes from. And then this this other project that I'm really working on now is the official, unofficial voting stations, voting for all who legally can't, right? So this art project talks about how 92 million people in 2016 could not legally vote, right? So that's youth under 18, non-citizens, right? Depending on what state you're in, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. And yeah, in some states you lose your right forever, right? If you've been to vote, if you've been incarcerated. Residents of US territories, and again, depending on state, what ID laws that they might have if you don't have that ID, right? So it's yeah. So again, creating this art project where I can create voting stations that really are open to all, right? Because the way that this country talks about voting is that like, we all need to vote again, right? But it's this neoliberal rhetoric that is actually really damaging, because it makes communities of people invisible, right? And so I think going back to that, right? Like I've always been passionate about these issues, but why I became an artist is that I can actually create these spaces that I want to actually see, right? I could sort of riff off of these bureaucratic processes and reimagine this new inclusive and humanized systems of civic engagement, right? Where I can't really see me doing that in many other places. And yeah, and so that's where I became an artist, and really, you know, do a lot of activism in a way through art, and creating these spaces where we can protest, we can vote, we can do all these things that push against, you know, what rights are given and not given to immigrants, right?
Yeah, that's, again, really powerful work. And I've got to say that, you know, one thing that stands out to me about your story, and I'm on the front lines of immigration talks and activism often, and it's very rarely the experience of legal immigration. That experience is one that is rarely spoken about. And it's just as difficult. There's an additional fear as someone who is undocumented, but there's a very real cultural shock that happens. And like you mentioned, you don't necessarily fit in, things don't transfer over more than just your education, your degrees, your careers. So thank you so much for sharing that and your parents' story. And I do want to say, like, I noticed both of you have arts in common. And I think that's great. I didn't know that United Dream had an arts division. And, you know, I'm curious, how do you personally, Sheridan, tie art and immigration in your new position, and that activism, and, you know, how do you tie those two together?
Totally. So I think similar to Aram, in art, we are creating the experiences, the worlds in which we want to live in. And I think that the beauty in, using art to tell our stories is that we get to talk about our communities in very nuanced ways. You know, I feel like a lot of a lot of the immigrants' rights movement could not exist without the artwork and the passion and the anger and defiance of the civil rights movement, of the trans and queer liberation movements. You know, we are building on our ancestors' wildest imaginations, their dreams, and through our art, we're able to create those experiences of the world that they wanted to live in when they were fighting, and that we continue in that fight today. At United We Dream, we believe firmly in the people that are most impacted by harmful policies can be the people who are leading the solutions. And that's whether that's in politics or if it's even in artwork and storytelling. And so one of the things that, one of the ways in which we really put all this together, for example, and put it into action too, in combining this, was with our Home is Here campaign. Our Home is Here campaign was a short campaign, storytelling, advocacy, direct action campaign that United We Dream, together with dozens of immigrant rights organizations, came together under this coalition to be able to tell the stories of DACA recipients and put a face to the people who are being targeted by Trump. The DACA program was terminated by Trump in 2017, and it impacted 700,000 people just like me, whose lives were suddenly in limbo. This case traveled all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the main plaintiff in the cases was actually a queer person, a queer young man. And so I think what that really spelled out to us and what we were seeing is that our community came from all of these various backgrounds. And what we had at the opportunity at the Supreme Court to say was that our home is here, and it impacts so many, a diverse range of people. Through our storytelling efforts, we did not want to show that the immigrants who were being impacted were only Latinos and only young people. We wanted to show that people who are undocumented and who are in this fight were Black, were API, trans, queer, workers, and so parents even. And so we built this broad campaign that combined direct action. We had high school walkouts a few days before the Supreme Court case. We had a rally out in front. We also had advocacy, right? Folks going to put together amicus briefs to tell the stories of people all across the country. One thing that we did is that we put together the stories of our people in a video format. We did this historic thing where we actually combined written stories and video stories so that the Supreme Court justices not only had to read who we are, but literally had to see our faces. This entire video initiative that we put together, if you go to homeishere.us/stories, you can find the videos of 9 undocumented people whose stories were presented before the Supreme Court justices to help convince them that the program needed to stay. The video storytelling in there was very, very unique in that the stories that we found and the way in which we created the creative vision for this was all led by queer people, queer, undocumented, and immigrant people, both from the concept development to the actual production. Our filmmakers were also immigrant women who were helping us in this fight. And 2 of the key stories that were of those 9 were, one was the story of Catalina, who was a trans woman who had faced, many deportations in her family, but through DACA was able to receive the hormone therapies that she needed to be able to live out her authentic life, to be able to pursue her PhD, and to move to Seattle, where she's happy, where she's now with her spouse, doing things like just gaming, taking walks out in nature. We had the story of Yasmin, who is an aspiring surgeon, but is also, is also a queer young woman who's in a relationship, who loves her New Mexico home, spends time out in the field with the hot air balloons. We captured all of these beautiful images and rich storytelling pieces of these folks because we didn't want the Supreme Court to just believe that this case was only protecting young people and that all they were taking away was just a driver's license, right? They were actually going to tear apart our communities, and we wanted to come in there with our values of centering queer and trans people, centering women, centering diverse stories. And we won. You know, all of these efforts really resulted in a victory in this June and helped us to build momentum for something greater. Already the Trump administration is continuing what it's always done of being cruel. They're trying to take away DACA again, even though the Supreme Court said it had to stay and that we were here to stay. And so really what our storytelling does, and that we are continuing to actually do, this is me getting a little bit off track now, but we actually have another rolling series around COVID-19, similarly, same fashion, right, led by queer immigrants to tell these stories. All of this is in an effort so that people can see us as we are in our full human richness. And so all of that to say that our arts, we believe that our arts should also be led by people who are impacted, because ultimately they have the potential to not only help us win these legal victories, but also change the culture around us so that more of our people are embraced.
So yeah, I was gonna say, like, thank you for that. I have my Home is Here shirt. I should have worn it, you know, today, like big yellow, very prominent. I wear it when I jog, where it's like, don't mess with me, home is here. You know, like I love that. So thank you again for the work that you do there. And it does, you know, tie in really well with a lot of what I'm saying, that it's a powerful way to tell stories. It's a powerful way to give voice to the voiceless, or people who often feel voiceless and powerless, unfortunately. So, you know, with that, I do want to keep, when we talk about immigration, a lot of people assume that it is illegal immigration, or that, you know, it's often a very singular, monochrome view of immigration as people who are just Mexican, for example, or Hispanic. But the cloth of, you know, the tapestry of immigration and of this country is just so varied in its colors and variations. And so I'm curious, how would you each tell, and Aram, I'll start with you, but how would you tell queer youth why immigration is important? Not so much illegal immigration, but why is immigration in general important, and why should our youth be aware of, you know, what is going out there currently in the immigration, you know, fight, but also what can they do as youth to help?
When you say why immigration is important, you mean, and when you say our youth, do you mean, who am I talking to? The broader
Queer
youth, or, okay, queer youth,
queer. Yeah.
but not necessarily queer immigrant youth, right?
Correct, yeah. So
okay.
This is someone who is, yeah, has no idea this is going on, you know, cannot necessarily relate to it. And, you know, kind of back to what Sherry was saying, I think I blended really well here in Houston and Texas, right, growing up, and largely Hispanic. For me, it was harder to come out as undocumented than it was to come out as gay or trans or any of the other ways to come out. So, you know, a lot of the people around me had no idea.
Right.
So how would you tell someone who isn't aware of that experience, doesn't have a personal connection to immigration, why is it important?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, it's all tied together, right? In terms of gender, you know, queerness or sexuality or what, you know, and race, and it's all tied together in this oppressive system, right? It's not compartmentalized as it often gets talked about here, right? The experience isn't that, actually. It's like what Sheridan was saying, is like the nuances of each of us, right? And what do we need to be our true authentic selves, whatever that may be, right? But it's like in this system, you know, this oppressive system of capitalism, right? And the United States right now, we feel it, is that it prioritizes, it keeps safe, right? Heteronormative, white, right? Cis, straight men, really, right? Yeah. So it's like our fights are connected, right? And of course it's like, just because you're a woman, you're not going to understand, being queer, or a straight woman's not going to understand. Like, marginality doesn't all look the same. However, it's all connected, right? So we need to all like fight for each other and show up for each other, because at the end of the day, it is that we are fighting against the super oppressive system that doesn't allow people to be themselves. It doesn't give people, it doesn't protect people's lives, right? And I think about, I really love reading a ton of books about women of color feminism, right? So one of my favorite books is Death Beyond Disavowal by Grace Kyung-Won Hong. And it talks about that, right? Like that this capitalist system doesn't protect people's lives, right? And we know that, we see that, right? Look at what this administration is doing to immigrants right now, right? Look at what the police do to Black and brown people, right? So it's all interconnected, and that I really feel that we need to fight for each other and show up for each other, so that we could be ourselves and we can have our lives be protected, right?
Yeah.
It's so simple.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. Very beautifully said. Yeah. And Sherry, what is your take on that? What would you tell our queer youth, when asked, why is immigration important?
Totally. I mean, I think that I kind of, speaking on a little bit of what Aram mentioned, I definitely grew up thinking that all of these identities and issues could be compartmentalized, that I was alone. And like, even when I was in high school, I wasn't out as undocumented in high school, because I just kept telling myself this myth that I was alone, that people didn't support me. And I think if I had seen it in the same way that I did see myself supported by my school with their own gay straight alliance, I think I might have felt more compelled to come out about my immigration status and that identity and how that influenced my life. But I wanted to belong. And I think that one of the things that one of our past field directors said to me once is that, everyone just wants to feel like they are loved and that they are welcomed. And as simple as that statement may sound, I think that most of us have experienced that at some point or another. And sometimes it may not have been necessarily tied to one of our identities, but something just happened and we were made to feel like we didn't belong. I think for sure, trans and queer young people feel that with a lot of frequency, because our mainstream culture right now there's not as much room for us to celebrate and love ourselves. And I think we're seeing it slowly more and more in representation and in the stories and in the art and everything around us. And I think for those young people who are seeing that around them, who are queer and trans, but not immigrants, that's a lot of what we as immigrants are experiencing too. It may not be exactly the same, right? Maybe the injustices or the feelings that we have, but there's some similarities there. And I think that ultimately, when we're all striving, as Aram mentioned, towards something together, like that's the point where I think that we can agree with each other and where we can get really excited about working with each other, because our lives are all intertwined. These experiences are intertwined. I also think today about something that was really that really touched my heart. I actually was reflecting right before this event about one of my friends who is a young queer white woman, and I was looking back at this my film that I created in college, and she was one of the few people who actually donated to this film that I was producing. And just that simple little act of friendship, of support, of investing really in my dreams, that really touched me. And I think that for those of you who have friends who are immigrants, whether or not they're queer or trans themselves, supporting them and being for them honestly goes a long way. We cannot underestimate the strength of friendship and love. All of us need that at one point or another. And sometimes when we as immigrants aren't experiencing that ourselves, or as queer folks, that's when you turn to your family, right? Your chosen family. And so I think that's another thing that people can do every day that doesn't require policy or knowing, this or that thing. It's just being there for your people.
That is again, very beautifully said. Yeah, you never know just how far a small gesture can go, especially when we're all tight together the way that we are. So I'd like to turn it around back to those queer youth who are immigrants, and maybe not necessarily undocumented, although undocumented, I'd say primarily when we're talking about rights, but for all immigrant queer youth, what rights, if you know any, and I do want to preface by saying, like, none of us are lawyers that I know of, right? So we're not lawyers, so we cannot give that kind of advice. So definitely double check and stuff. But like, what rights do we have as immigrant youth, queer immigrant youth?
I can jump in on that. So the really good thing is that all of us have pretty much the same, as immigrants, as undocumented people, all of us have a lot of the same rights as US citizens have. I would say that the big one that most people do not have is the right to a free attorney, right? A lawyer that can be appointed to you. So that's the big thing. But otherwise, we have the freedom to express ourselves out in public, to ask if we're approached by a police officer, a deportation agent, or any other kind of federal employee. We have the right to ask for their name and badge number. We have rights and we do have power. And so at United We Dream, if you go to unitedwedream.org/know your power, you can find some of those resources there that every single person has, whether you're a young person or an adult or a parent or even an educator. For us, we really hone in on knowing our rights when it comes to confronting a law enforcement officer, since that's the scenario that a lot of immigrant folks can face, or perhaps even LGBTQ young folks, if you face some type of discrimination, right? If you're in this encounter, there's things you can do, like remaining silent, not signing any paperwork. As a minor, having your parent with you, that's essential, right? And if for some reason you are someone who is witnessing these types of situations, recording and photographing these instances can also be really important. I know that can be super scary as a minor, so I'm also not going to encourage you to do things that are scary, right? All of these things are things that are that we learn and we grow as time goes on. But if you are a young person, you can share this resource with your parents or your loved ones, even printing them out and having them around a campus or at some other public space, whenever it's safe, because also we're dealing with COVID, that can be really beneficial. And another thing that's important for immigrant young people to know, or even if you have an immigrant young person in your life, is that we also in certain states have access to in-state tuition when reaching higher education, which I find is one of the big things that a lot of people tend to come to us at United We Dream about. And so for that, I do want to make a plug for Immigrants Rising. Let me see. I don't know if I can share this real quick. Oh, no, I don't think I can share this screen. Oh, yes, I can. Here we go. So I want to make a quick plug for Immigrants Rising because they are formerly known as Educators for Fair Consideration. They have some immigrant folks that are on their team that have really great resources on how to attend college and some financial literacy workshops as well. So do make sure to check out their website. Again, they're not United We Dream, but they are a really great organization that you can go to that has some of those questions or some of the responses to those questions you may have. We also have oh wait, let me go back to the Know Your Power so I can show you all that. So this is the Know Your Power website, where you can find more of our flyers, resources, etc. So definitely check those out. The last resource that I want to share that's related to our rights and college is that, but apart from Immigrants Rising, if you go to YouTube and check out this series called College Uncomplicated, Undoc You, then you can find a mini series on access to higher education. It's a series that I created as a youth leader, volunteering on my time with support of one of the former staff members of United We Dream, that talks through what rights and resources you have when applying for higher education. It's a little outdated, but it can definitely be a good start if you're wanting to check that out. But always know that people are out here and have your back. Don't ever feel don't ever feel afraid or alone in case you are in a situation where you're trying to figure college out. If you need to reach us, check us out on our website, or send us a DM on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And if you, and same thing is, if you ever encounter a situation where you're with an ICE officer, we have a hotline on that website that you can check out. It's at the very top of our website. No matter which page you're on, you can give us a call there too, and be connected with one of our folks who can either support you there directly or connect you to another resource that can. But don't feel like you're alone. I've been there so many times when I was 16, 17, and I was just like super angsty about what I was gonna do after I graduated high school. You're not alone. We're here for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to say those are some resources that I wasn't aware of also. And so it's very, very powerful to know that there's that much backing. I'm sure for little kids out there who are still, perhaps just finding out that they're undocumented, like it happened for a lot of us DACA kids, didn't find out until we were like 16 or so. And Aram, can you share, like, from your perspective, what rights queer youth might have, if you can share some? Or
I want to show the slide real quick because I made some art with curtains with the statement to police and ICE. So with those statements, the red card statements you were saying, right? I do not wish to speak with you, answer your questions. So yeah, so for me in art, use is really important. So to be able to claim protected spaces in exhibition spaces, but also this idea of, it's sort of coming from a petty place, but if like ICE shows up at your door, that you could just close your curtains and tell them to read it, right? And tell them go away, right? Which is like the title of the piece, or which is messages to authorities. And then this piece, once you go into a space, into the red curtains, then there is you have, constitutional rights in various languages. So this one wrapped around this column. So it was in Spanish, Arabic, and Korean. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to show how you could translate some of this into artwork, right? Because for me, obviously as an artist, and to want to share these resources and information, I make art about it, right? And like, yeah, so text becomes really important for me there. But like Sheridan was saying, the burden sort of falls on us, right? In terms of marginalized, oppressed people to know or to do a lot of research to find resources, right? So, definitely look into the resources that Sheridan shared, but also knowing that people are there and you might have to do a lot of work to find your people, but it's like totally, worth it to find your people. So do that and be supported and feel supported. And, going back to the importance of telling your story, right? Whether that is through art or not, right? To be able to tell your story, there's a lot of power in that. And one thing about art that I find also very powerful is that it's a pathway to healing, right? And in in our society, so many things are, so many pathways to healing are cut off from us, right? And so make art, find joy, tell your story as nuanced, as complicated as it is, you know, and we gotta move forward, you know?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Claim your space in so many different ways. Let's claim our queerness, claim our immigrant, claim our culture. That is something that, you know, I see a lot with the folks that I encounter. Is sometimes we get so split between, you know, American or Hispanic or Asian, like which culture really pulls us. And the reality is, you know, we're all our own unique mix and shades of all kinds of races and sexual, all over the spectrum. So claim your space, be colorful, be you. Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So I want to kind of transition over to hopefully kind of where we would be going, I think, for most queer youth in the fall, hopefully, which is back to school. You know, whether it happens in the fall, in the spring, you know, you know, all of that is still kind of in the air. You know, Sharon, you also mentioned there are ways for undocumented youth to make it to college, to make it to school. And for some of these, you know, queer youth who maybe are not immigrant also, who are maybe noticing and a little bit more aware of, you know, their possibly immigrant or possibly undocumented immigrant peers, what are the things that they can do to help their peers if they see that there is, you know, a problem, perhaps a problem of access to education, a language problem, maybe, you know, maybe, you know, like one thing that I encountered back at UT, you know, 15 years ago was protesters, right, as well. What are the things that we can do as allies, as allies for our immigrant peers?
I can jump on that one. So the one big just thing, you know, is like with your friends, if you have any folks that are undocumented, is being careful not to out your friends or your peers on their immigration status. I think in the same way as queer and trans folks, we might want to be careful around who we disclose those things about our personal lives with. It's similar around immigration status because there can be risks. And so I think checking in with your friend about, you know, like, is this something that, like, to what extent are you sharing this with people, or is it just with me? You know, I think talking about that, you probably want to have like a real, just like one-to-one with someone when they're sharing their stories, or if for some reason you want to share it, like let them know why or in what context. But I would say in most cases, unless the person is already actively out publicly telling their story, you don't want to be mentioning their immigration status. But things that you can, of course, do quietly are artwork is a big one, right? Aram just mentioned all the different things that you can do with translating even these resources into art pieces for your own community or your school. Another one, when it deals with access, is that many times in institutions, whether that's high schools or in colleges, there are many times barriers to certain programs or paid opportunities that require a social security number, which is what we as undocumented people do not have. And especially now, people who are growing up without DACA, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds right now, they certainly do not have DACA's protections of work authorization and social security number. So things that you can ask is either, right, depending on where you're at. If you're in high school, you might get maybe one of your counselors or a teacher and say, you know, hey, can you help me figure out why this thing requires a social security number? Because I think it might help some of our classmates if be a part of this program if that was one less barrier. And you know, having those conversations, I had to do a lot of that myself whenever I was in high school, is having those kind of weird questions and then having to be like, it's because I don't have a social, like I didn't know what to do. And so I think if you're an ally and are just being mindful of those things, that can be something, right? And sometimes things won't be able to budge because of all these different bureaucratic things that might be in the way, but sometimes you never know. And you could have made the difference for someone. I absolutely loved, recently there was this art poster contest that I saw for young people to make art posters and to win a gift card. And I asked them, is this something that requires a social security number? And they said, no, absolutely not. If the person does not have a social security, you will find other options to be able to, help support them for this art piece that they're creating. And so sometimes it can just be a discussion. Now, when it comes to taking the streets and fighting for our loved ones, there's a lot of different things that you have to be mindful of. We did put together one resource that was specific to this summer's, a lot of the uprisings that were happening in support of Black lives, but I think it can still be relevant for all of you today. And so if you go to our Instagram, you can find it over there on the grid. I'm gonna show it off right now for just a second so you all can see it. But if you check it out, we have this graphic specifically for undocumented young people, but again, easily translatable. It's a guide for participating in protests. So some things that you'll see is, of course, making sure that you know the location, time, find out who's organizing and the contacts. You'll want to be with your group. You'll want to know a good place to meet back up. If you are an immigrant, you might want to have a person's contact info for emergency, etc. And so if you check this out, it's 10 little graphic pages that you can swipe through to be able to see some of these tips. But all of our, it's hard for me to summarize in one instance what everyone can do, because we're all going to experience different things out in protest based on how we look and how we present and how the world interacts with us. But this can be a start. But of course, like always, do whatever is at your comfort level. Not everyone needs to be out on the streets. Sometimes it's about that individual care one-to-one, or sometimes it can even be these things about changing access at the school so that more people can get those same programs and resources that others are able to access.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. Aram, ideas on how our youth can help their immigrant peers?
Yeah, I think definitely, it's even as an immigrant myself, as I get more and more familiar with immigration policy and all the obstacles that there are with everything, really, right? I'm sort of often baffled, even though I think I'm pretty well versed in it all, right? Like, for example, I love the HANA Center here in Chicago, and they work for citizenship for all adoptees, right? Because they're adoptees, right? Who don't have legal status here, who don't have citizenship, right? And so even when I tell people that, their mind is blown, right? Because it's how do you, that at the core shows how ridiculous, right, immigration policy is, and how inhumane it is to be able to take people, as children, right, here to a different country and not even secure their immigration status here, right? And that, yeah, so I would say just do what you can to familiarize yourself with some of this, whether it is volunteering, whether it is, talking to a friend who is an immigrant and, asking about their experiences if they're comfortable with that. And just sort of familiarize yourself with this, just because I think it's just so inhumane, and there's so many obstacles, and obviously we're trying to fight it all, and you can't do it all at one time. But even just hearing these stories and sort of sharing what you can, and just to sort of it just becomes this realization of the system is really broken, right? And so do that, and then show up, right? Yeah, whether it is volunteering, whether it is, kind gestures of care and love toward, your immigrant peers. But yeah, just, I think that's my advice, yeah.
So I'm hearing so many, I'm going to come back to something that we've all mentioned, especially you two, which is about how there's so much connection between the queer experience, the LGBTQIA2S plus experience, and the immigrant experience, again, regardless of whether one is undocumented or not. And it sounds like the best way to be an ally is the same way that we would be allies for our queer fronts. Ask the questions, be private, don't out anybody. Allyship is ally, being an ally is a verb, right? It is not a label, which means getting educated, stepping out to your comfort, at your comfort level, which are all things that we're all aware of, right? Because they're the same things that we ask our allies or ask of our allies. So I love it. I love it. And I've got to say, like, the intersectionality part of it is something that I struggled with a lot. Similar, like with Sherry, back in early, middle school, elementary, et cetera, like I did not come out as undocumented at all. And it wasn't until I'd say in the last 3-4 years that I actually started talking about both at the same time, because they are that interconnected. And there is value in speaking up and telling our stories. So I'd have to marry that and echo that also, that telling our stories, claiming our space, and being that friend to someone else, even when it's just a hand on a shoulder, can go a long way. So thank you. Thank you both for that.
And I actually just remembered one more thing that people can actually do because it's virtual. So there is this compilation of short films that people can watch that tell 4 short documentaries and one video poem called Undocu-Joy that people can check out. And it's something that the Undocu Black Network, NACASEC, of which the HANA Center is a part of, and United We Dream, we all collaborated with these filmmakers to put together this compilation that's hosted by Working Films, and it's called Stories Beyond Borders. And I just put a link on the side, but if folks want to check that out, they can set up their own virtual screening. There's a guide there for discussion. Sometimes even just the stories that we consume and watch can be really important. Right now, there are things out in the world on Netflix with 2 series that our organization does not recommend that immigrant young people watch or people of color watch, quite frankly. They're Immigration Nation and Living Undocumented. And why? It's because a lot of those stories are told from the lens of a white savior. And it's told in this way to where it definitely wants to appeal to young folks, to allies, to folks who are voters. But what it does is that it actually puts a lot of our harms and our trauma front and center. And so what this group of stories does, the Stories Beyond Borders, is that it's a lot more well-rounded, features different racial groups of immigrants, and has a guide there for us to be able to talk things in a way that I think is a bit more peaceful and comfortable than some of those series that are out there in the mainstream world. So definitely you can check that out, and the requesting the screening, the virtual screening, is all free.
Thank you again for saying that. And Aram, are you gonna say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can keep expanding on what people can do, right? Because it's there's a lot you could do, and I think one of the things that I also want to mention is that sorry, I hear my child us yelling upstairs, so I just got a little distracted. But I think language is so important, right? In terms of not like English and Spanish, but language is so important, right? Because it frames the way we see the world and interact with the world. But so when you hear the damaging rhetoric against immigrants, right? They are here to take our jobs, or they shouldn't have these rights because they don't pay taxes, right? I would say those are really important moments if you are safe, right? To confront those, right? And ask more questions, to be wait, I'm pretty sure undocumented people pay taxes. What are you talking about? Or to be wait, can you go into that more? What do you mean they're taking our jobs? Which jobs? What are you talking about? Right? Because as soon as we start sort of prying those, it's a lot of power, and how power tells its narratives is not real, and it's not And we see that in this administration. It's like, there's so much nonsense, right? So I really encourage you to like stand up in those moments and speak up, you know, and question these things that are saying, and say that that is wrong because of these reasons, right? We need to rupture those narratives, because in the American imagination, yeah, it's like immigrants are here to take our jobs and they are only criminals and blah, blah. And we hear all this stuff coming out of our president's mouth, but we know this is like, this is power talking to keep their power and to, you know, say that immigrants are a threat in this sort of way, which we are not, right? So.
Yeah. And God, I'm just like, so many things to say. Like, I feel like we could keep talking for hours and hours on just that part of like, speak up, educate yourself, don't give up. There's so many people like us out there. Our experiences are so varied, and it's beautiful, right? There is no shame. And that's something that continues to surprise me. Is like every time that you reveal a little something about yourself, or even accept something about yourself, you're bound to find closer relationships and closer friends, as long as you are more true to yourself as well. So yeah, just awesome. And I actually also want to follow up on Sherry's point about those two series on Netflix, the Undocuseries, and I can't remember the other one, but I do also want to issue a bit of a trigger warning with those. If you are undocumented, if you are unDACA, if your parents are undocumented, I would caution whenever, if you do choose to watch those, they should come with trigger warnings, especially for our people. So yeah, just be mindful of that, and have a strong support system around you. Feel free to reach out if you do need help. Yeah, with any of that stuff.
One thing I want to jump in and say is just like, you know, that even the expression of our joy is radical, right? And I think that's like, so it just speaks to the moment we're in. It's like so crazy, right? That like even us being us, or, you know, even immigrants like expressing joy, or like not telling a whole story about hardship becomes radical and alarming, right? I was recently like on this artist panel. You know, I teach at a college and university, and you know, do a lot of visiting artist talks and things like that. And yeah, like my work uses a lot of play and humor, and, you know, collective making is so important to me, because we can like have fun together and like, you know, make stuff together. And, you know, a lot of my banners are really like uses like unicorn fabric and, you know, or peppers, or like crazy prints, and the slogans also are like really sort of fun and funny, right? Like my favorite one is, you know, I took this out into the farms in the Central Valley where I grew up, right? Where it said like, or my partner carried it out there, where it was like, pick it yourself, pendejo, right? or like, I'm an immigrant, I'm here to take your job, but you don't have one, right? Less funny in the era of COVID, but right? But I have this question where people were like, oh, it's so surprising that there's like humor and joy in your work. And I was just like, where are we in the American imagination? Or how is immigrants defined so by whiteness that even like joy and humor can't be a part of our narrative, you know? And I just want to say that, yeah, I haven't seen Undocujoy, but I'm like really excited to see that for that very reason, right? And I haven't seen the other Netflix series that you mentioned just because of that very reason, right? Of it being feeding back into this narrative of like, we are suffering, we are, you know, constantly in pain and in trauma all the time, which is true to some extent and can be true, right? But it doesn't look like that. It doesn't mean our life is not filled with joy and expressions of joy and creativity and all of these beautiful things that life is.
Yes, yes. Again, very well said. I feel like we could keep going and going and going and going. Actually, I want to kind of take a little bit of a left turn here. We're talking a lot about the other things that make us human, the other things that bring us joy, right? Like our work is our work, our struggles are our struggles. Tell me more about what brings you joy. Like, what is it that you do that brings you joy? Let's say on a regular Saturday morning when you're kind of laying down your capes from all of the hard work in fighting for immigrant rights. I'll let y'all pick who goes first.
I can talk. I love working, right? And I love being an artist. And so, I mean, that's the best part about being an artist, right? Is that of course it is a struggle financially and stability wise. Your life may look a little different, but at the same time, like, I create projects that I believe passionately. And all of my works are super big and collaborative, and I get to like work with a ton of crazy artists all the time, and we get to talk about art and riff off of each other and make up crazy ideas, which is where a lot of my ideas come from, is just like shooting the shit with people. And then, me bugging my partner in 2016, be like, let me vote. Let me tell you how to vote. Let me tell you how to vote. I can't vote. I'm not a citizen, but let me tell you how to vote. Right. And he was like, you need to leave me alone and make this a project or something. Right. And I was like, that is what I'm going to do. Right. And so, yeah. And so, for example, this, the 2020 iteration of the official, unofficial voting stations. Yeah. Just like I've worked with a huge crew of artists to create these voting kits for the disenfranchised that have, ballots that let anyone vote, issues ballots where you could create your own. There's like voting stickers for all, wristbands for all, like, a musical playlist of protest songs by Chicago artists. Like we just came together and made this like awesome kit. And then now it's at the exciting phase where 50 of them are going out in the world and people can use them for whatever they need it for. Right. And so, and some of those are really awesome, fun, creative activations. Like my friend Carol, she's gonna put one on the back of her motorcycle, rig a ballot box, and drive that around. Moto Voto, she's calling it. But yeah, so different sort of activations are happening. So all of these sort of stages of my work is like just brings me so much joy, because it becomes this huge network of people and radical thinkers and creative, unpredictable people that like, unpredictable in the best way, that keep me on my toes sort of way. So I love being an artist. I love making art. I love making art with a bunch of people. And so it's like easy to be a workaholic. Of course, I experience burnout, and I have a 5-year-old who, is awesome and is awesome to hang out with all the time. And I really love gardening and drinking cocktails.
Well, that's good. Again, finding joy in what you do that is what we could all ask of life, right? It's like that is what brings, bacon to the table, or vegan bacon to the table, and also what brings me joy and helping out the world. So thank you for sharing that. What about you, Sherry? What do you do during your off time, or what brings you joy, regardless of off time or on time? What brings you joy?
Yeah, I think mine is a little bit blurred with some on time too now, but it's great. Like I I went to school to study film, and I loved theater as a kid, and I love that I'm getting to combine all those things with organizing and activism, because it's given me such a different view of the world. And I think what it has really bestowed upon me has been like the gift of really appreciating all of life's joys. Because in our art, it's just expression. It's just all the feel good things. And so for me, it's been, on the job, like we had our own little cookbook that we had up and running in June that we launched. It was only 10 recipes that we have put together out right now, but it's like even just that, right? Like our own undocumented cookbook, getting recipes from folks. We had a drag show in June too that was super bomb. We had our some musicians up on our Instagram on Fridays back in May. It was just all these things that we hope to continue doing so that people can really embrace all of those little creative moments in our lives, those moments of rest and entertainment. And then when I'm trying to be off and like kind of back in my own zone, it really just has been about appreciating my partner and appreciating my little dog, like even my sister who's here with me, who she has been in school like 24/7 virtually. I don't know how she's doing that too, but just really getting to be in touch with my feelings and my appreciations for them has made a world of difference. And taking care of my mental health has also been a big new thing for me. I just recently got reintroduced to incense. My mom used to buy those all the time when I was a kid, and I thought she was like being some kind of hippie. I wasn't sure what she was doing. And then I was so down in these last couple of weeks. My partner went to buy some incense, and now I'm just like, oh my God, I just remember how warm this made me feel when my mom had this. And so it's like I'm recalling all of those little things. And it's funny because sometimes I'm like, I always tell myself I would never do this, but then it's like it comes back to you it comes back to me because it's comforting. And I'm just trying to embrace that and continue to do more of that each day, because look, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but today I saw that the passing of our sister Chi Devane, who was on Drag Race, RuPaul's Drag Race. And when I saw that today, just a couple hours ago, I was in complete shock. And it really brought back to me like just how valuable and precious life is. We survive so many things, and sometimes our own bodies, it's time. And I've really come to really want to embrace all of those beautiful things in my life, because our life is worth living. Existing is radical in itself. Being an immigrant is radical in itself. That Undocu Joy poem, I really want y'all to check it out on YouTube, because one of the things that Yosima Reyes says is that being undocumented isn't really a legal status. It's a condition to make us not smile. And I was like, that's it. That's what it is. And I want to keep smiling. And so I'm trying that. And even when it's hard, I'm trying to find those moments. And without chosen family and even people like y'all, like I know that those moments would be really hard. But so thank y'all. Thank y'all for even having me tonight.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I've got to say, I did not know about Chi Devane. I decided to disconnect half of the day. Yeah. So I'll be looking into that and processing that later. But very, very similar. And again, it sounds like there's some connection there as far as just finding joy in the little moments and finding joy in your passions, which happen to sync up with what you do in your profession, and your fight, and your passions for civil rights and equality and that. So I hope that is able to give some of our youth some hope about how maybe, if you're looking for a direction to go in, at the end of the day, follow your passions, that moral compass and that fire around allyship, and how we can be allies to everybody around us, regardless of our differences. So, I think I want to close, or actually, maybe not close, because I know that we can keep going forever, But I do want to bring it back to kind of some of the challenges that we're having now and day around, for example, like meeting virtually, right? And, you know, this is something that I hadn't considered, which I feel like I should have, but I had not, which is how would you recommend, or what steps would you take in order to create safe spaces for our undocumented friends in a virtual world? You know, again, you mentioned like the movie screening, for example, right? I think that's a brilliant idea. Do you have any recommendations around how we can make that a safe space, or what we should keep in mind?
Totally. I mean, with any type of screening, I mean, one of the practices that we've been doing so much at United We Dream is incorporating a community altar into our spaces. And that might be difficult to do virtually for a screening, but perhaps, you know, we can find imaginative ways. I think that there's a lot of things that we can adapt. And again, the Working Films Stories Beyond Borders, the guide there has a recommendation on what we do at United We Dream. So just like literally like the steps to setting it up, things you can say to other participants. But I think always taking care of yourself before and after, writing yourself affirmations, giving yourself love. I am a big singer. I'm not a good singer, but I go sing. Whenever I see anything hard, I spend some time in the bathroom and I sing to myself because that's what I need to do. And so those are some things you can do. I think that in terms of like hosting just virtual spaces in general, I've seen some conversations online on Twitter. I'm not going to say that it's my ideas, but like, you know, people mentioning, you know, the fact that something very real, that many of our folks who are immigrants or queer folks who may be coming from a working class family, and so requiring people to have their video on when it's not necessary, like, don't do it, right? If you don't need to see each other for like, if it's not necessary, like don't do it, because sometimes that can also be maybe a sense of like guilt or shame for people if they have to show the living situations that they're in, or perhaps they don't have some of the tech resources that others might have. So being mindful of those things, of course, first step is like making sure that your people that you're gathering have those things. Can you support them in some way with that? You know, that's just one of the things that I would say in terms of virtual spaces. I feel like I think in our Know Your Power on our Instagram, I think we have a couple more tips as well that you can check out. But I honestly feel like virtual spaces have actually been in some ways a little bit freeing, because it has created more access for people who maybe couldn't get to a place to be in unity before. But it has its trade-offs.
Aram, do you have any suggestions on how we can help make or create safe spaces virtually? And I'm just going to throw this out there, but also like maybe put together joint virtual projects and artists, because it just sounds, the community aspect of your work is it sounds invigorating. Yeah, so how?
I'm going to share my screen and maybe show you the recent project I'm working on. If that's okay, so I created a virtual, so this is for the unofficial voting station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't, which I did in 2016. I collaborated with over 15 artists, activists, organizations all over US and Mexico. We created these voting stations for the disenfranchised that just took over, and they all look different in 2016. So you know, some of my favorites were like my collaborators in Mexico City who did a station in Tijuana, Acapulco, and Mexico City. The Tijuana one, after people voted, they like threw ballots or threw the votes over the border wall and things like that. So they were very performative and imaginative, right? So it didn't have to actually look like a voting station because we're reimagining it anyway. So what thing would you do with it, right? And so, so for the 2020 upcoming elections, I was creating this project again, focusing on these voting kits for the disenfranchised to go out. And then I realized that, you know, the project can't sort of function the way that I wanted it to with COVID, right? That it doesn't become very accessible because, you know, people don't quite know where the kids are going, if those spaces are safe, whatever, right? And so that it dawned on me sort of early where I was like, okay, I I need to create a virtual voting station, right? And so this is sort of in the beta phase. It's actually not ready yet, but I'm going to share it with you guys. So just don't, if there's a little bit of things that aren't working perfectly, just know that we are fixing them and we know what to fix at the moment. But I'm very excited to show you. So there's vote and act. And so with vote, you would go in, and in languages, you could pick 8 different languages. I am voting here because, right? So I am voting here because I want to, right? And then there's an issues ballot. So all incarcerated people should have the right to vote, yes or no. The legal age to vote should be lowered, yes. If so, what age? All residents of U.S. territory should have the right to vote. No ID should be required to vote, yes. And then you could create your own, right? Right? And then you get to vote on your own. And then you could vote, right? And again, those are available in the different languages. And then there's the candidate ballot. So I could go in here and then, you know, create my own candidate. There's these ones already people had put in. I could, of course, vote for those. Sounds good. And vote. And so this project I created for this reason, right? To make voting really accessible. And in this moment, the accessibility becomes, you know, virtual or even mail-in, right? Which we're even struggling with that. The Acts page is really fun too, because all the different collaborators have created different things. So you could print your own ballots in all the languages. Undocumented projects created these wristbands that says, if we could vote, we would. So you could download your own and print your own. This is the playlist of protest songs by Chicago musicians created by Sadie Wood. So there's a Spotify and you could download it. Voting stickers for all. So we created these stickers, right? That, you know, since when you go to vote, you get wristbands and stickers, and these really become these symbols, right? And for people who can't legally vote, we don't have access to these symbols, right? And so then we need to create our own. So actions to expand voting rights. Some posters you could download, and we're creating an arts curriculum. So this is expanding, but there's like a PowerPoint you could download to use to you know, teach about who are disenfranchised in the United States, right? And more specifics around those laws. And actually another an educator is creating a math lesson around disenfranchisement and the percentages, you know, and the numbers around there. So that's really exciting. So to be able to create these collaborative projects that then become more accessible to more people. And then on the view is where you'll be able to see the tallies, right? So right now, this is flashing people's answers to I'm voting here because, right? And so in this way, the anonymity is there, right? So it doesn't compromise anyone's, you know, you're not outing anyone. And so anyone can vote that has access to the website, and then put their votes on here. So in a way it becomes, you know, hopefully a megaphone for you know, the sentiments of people who can't legally vote or are discontented, right? And are voting in solidarity, right? Yeah, so I need practice. Yeah, so.
This is a great project. I guess, like, as an internet nerd myself, this is brilliant. So thank you for putting it together.
So yeah, check that out and submit your votes, because everyone can in this voting station.
I absolutely love that, because I feel like growing up in the Texas public education system, like rights. I felt like, it's funny because I feel like the story around the rights were like, oh, it's these things that people can do, like they're guaranteed it. But then it was weird to me whenever it was like, oh, but I don't have the right to vote, I don't have the right to drive, I don't have the right to work. And then what I learned though was that I feel like this art piece just exemplifies the fact that like freedom is different from our rights, and we all have these freedoms, like and the rights are kind of like when it's in law, when it's in on paper. But this is imagination, this is freedom, this is really, I think, an exciting future. And I'm so thankful that you've created this. Like, I just know that if, I don't know, it warms my heart because I'm like, yes, everyone, we're all in it. And it's weird how like we can grow up feeling like, again, like we're not welcome, but then these experiences are there to say, yes, we see you, we hear you. I absolutely love that, Aram. Thank you for sharing that with everyone.
Thank you so much. Yay, I got positive feedback. Yay. So you guys are one of my first audiences that I'm showing it to. So thank you so much for the enthusiasm. And I think by the goal is next Friday, it will be like public and shareable, but the link is up there, official, unofficial.vote. So thank you so much. But yeah, I really encourage youth, particularly youth, to create art, because I think we could do so much with art, right? And yeah, I think there's so many ways that we can use it for activism also. And I think the main thing that sometimes gets forgotten is that art is the language of imagination, right? And imagination is so key to action, right? We vote or want to vote because we can imagine the future with a certain person, right? As president potentially, or whatever, right? But I really want people to, or particularly youth, to make art and to think about a future in making art and making that a part of your everyday, because it is really fun and you don't have to be broke. And yeah, and that so much is possible in this field, and language, I gotta say.
And I do want to just cap that with saying, like, and it's ageless, meaning you can do that whether you're 13, 14, your voice counts. Art is powerful. And as Aram has shown, Aram and Sherry have shown, art can be a pivotal aspect when we're sharing our stories around activism and really driving change. So thank you all so much for the chat today.
Yeah, this has been amazing, y'all. And we still have like 5 minutes left. I just wanted to jump in. But yeah, Aram, your comment about imagination made me think. I'm currently reading The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And one of the things that he says is that like when we're traumatized, not being able to use our imagination to imagine a different outcome of the traumatic situation is what like causes PTSD, basically. I'm also not a doctor. But so thinking about how especially like marginalized communities in the United States can use imagination to combat the trauma that they're constantly under, I think is really a powerful idea. I also wanted to specifically challenge the US-born citizens who are watching this to learn our country's history. Like that is our responsibility. With the privilege of being born in the United States, we have the responsibility to learn our history and to know about the Chinese Exclusion Act, to know about Japanese internment during World War II, and to know about these horrifically racist immigration policies that have been enacted throughout our country's history the whole time. There's never been a period in our history when we haven't had awful racist immigration policies. And the whole Muslim ban is just the most recent iteration of this. And so without knowing our history, we cannot be allies to our community. And that's our responsibility, whether you are straight or queer or Christian or Muslim or Jewish. Like, if you were born in the United States, this is your job. The question that I wanted to bring it back to for y'all, specifically for GSAs, because we all have the GSA experience, is what can GSAs do to be allies to the immigrants, undocumented or documented, in their schools? And also, like, how can they signal to the immigrants in their school that the GSA is a safe place for them to come?
Definitely. I think, I mean, very first, I think it's kind of like what we've mentioned throughout. I think the two things that come to mind are really about creating that welcoming culture, whether that's like through the artwork, the language. But the other piece, I think, is around supporting and access to whatever other programs that might be there at the school. I mean, I grew up undocumented in Fort Worth, Texas, and you know, I had a lot of trouble with like access to like even having a computer. My siblings who came after me had access with like issues with trying to get into their band. And so there might be things like that folks just need help with. You know, I think that having that solidarity with one another and trying to figure out like what your classmates need is important. And it really extends even beyond immigration status, of course, because it's, I think when you're at that young age, when you're in high school, I think GSAs, really it's about creating that community for one another. You know, I think had I just known that there were other undocumented people at my campus, that there were teachers who had outwardly expressed, you know, like, well, like, you know, I'm showing support for immigrants, or I love immigrants, you know, those kinds of that kind of imagery just wasn't around my school. We certainly had a lot of pride for the colleges around us. We had pride over like I mentioned, our Longhorns, because we were a cow town, but we didn't really show support for our students in terms of our racial, cultural identities, or even our immigration status. So having artwork like that, having that at school, can be great. Some of our schools, I mean, when it came to the one school district that really took it a step up for us that we saw was in Oklahoma City. I was very, as a Texan, I was very pleasantly surprised that Oklahoma City, the school district there, you know, partnered up with our youth team, Oklahoma, Dream Action Oklahoma, to say, like, you know, we're going to give this day to where all the teachers can walk out with their students in support of DACA. So the days before the Supreme Court hearing, you know, the entire school district worked with our youth leaders to say, okay, how are we going to get our students from point A to point B? How are we going to make sure that people have that freedom to express what they're going to say, have their little program? And it was all youth and student led and directed. And so I think that for the adults at the schools, you know, supporting the leadership of your students in that way will always be very important. And again, access. The big one is always around social security numbers. Do we need that for the student to be able to be a part of this program? And I think those are like the big bases that I see and that I can remember from when I was at that time. And any other things about college access, again, please like hit us up, check out United We Dream. And there's a bunch of other youth teams that we can connect you with across the country if for some reason like you're elsewhere and need that kind of support.
So I'm going to jump on that one too, Frederick. I think it's brought to mind a project that's actually happening in the city of Boston, where the police department, APD, was actually working on a safe spaces campaign, which mirrors a lot of what's happening in Seattle as well, where they train businesses and nonprofits on how to be LGBTQIA+ safe spaces and allies. And recently they started also blending in immigrant training and immigrant rights with it. So just an idea, like it could be something similar to where maybe there's a sticker or a badge, or like, you know, I think in my GSA, what we did with our teachers was, you know, back in the day was the upside down triangle was our logo. you know, and that was what we used. But one of the things that we've talked about is stripping away the pride colors from it and instead making it like human hands, like just all kinds of hands. So to say, this is a safe space for all, right? Not just queer or et cetera, but these are the teachers that are safe to go to with any questions in case we're dealing with immigrants who aren't queer or don't know that they're queer or aren't out yet as queer, right? Because we all need help one way or another.
Yeah, I definitely think about how important it is to create coalitions, right? So if you have a GSA, is there a different group at your school that you could do events with or have little like get-togethers with, right? And to create these various coalitions so that you show up and you show that you are like that this group is safe for everybody and welcoming and inviting, and you know, so and I think that like even beyond, right, is that we constantly need to create coalitions, right? So because we can't do this alone and we need to have each other's back. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. This has been amazing. It's been wonderful. It's definitely like, we've been doing Q Plus EDU sessions since June, and this is like coming full circle on a lot of the other sessions that we had. We had one that was the anti-Black roots of queerphobia and transphobia. That was really eye-opening. On just Tuesday of this week, we did prison abolition session that was really phenomenal. And then on the 28th, we have one coming up that's decentering whiteness from queerness. So yeah, all these things. I think, yeah, the message that I just keep being reminded of over and over again, and hopefully it'll stick at some point, is that it's all socially constructed, like gender, borders, crime. The Twitter thread about the social construction of crime really kind of blew my mind. So definitely look that one up. But thank you all so much for being here. This has been absolutely wonderful. The recording of this should be up on the website on qplusedu.org by the end of the month. And we thank you all so much for being here. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thanks,
Have a
everybody.
great rest of your day.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Have a good one, y'all.